What helps you understand someone loves you? Thanks for joining us today. Hi there, and welcome to our Web Weekend podcast for December 20th, 2020. This is our fourth week of Advent. We're excited to be able to continue to share some of the adventures that are happening as it relates to Advent and the Advent songs that we have been talking about together. And as we think about some of those together today, we're going to continue to take a few minutes to talk about how love can be refreshed and how sometimes we find love in the unexpected. And as we get ready to start, let me just remind you as well of our kids ministry teaching videos that are available on Facebook. If you search for Cabin Kids online at Facebook, then what you will find is our Cabin Kids Facebook page, and the teaching videos, the interactive videos are there for you. Well, let's jump in to finding out about Love Refreshed today. As a young man in university, I was involved in a number of camps at that particular point, and some of them were boys camps and some of them were teen camps, and a variety of different kinds of things where I would be involved in leadership. And so this one boys camp that I was involved in, where we were counseling in the cabin with the boys, and they were younger boys, probably in that 9, 10, 11 range. And at one point, they all decided they needed to have a pillow fight. And so we kind of talked it through and set the rules and set the boundaries, and then we started into a pillow fight. And I was participating in the pillow fight, and at one point, it's like I can see it in slow motion as it's happening. I'm swinging my pillow toward one of the boys, and it hits him in the back, and as it hits him in the back, it pushes him toward the bunk, and he hits his face on the bunk, and he bites through his lip, and he gives himself quite a bit of blood there. And so the pillow fight is stopped, and we're in a bit of a mess where we're trying to get him cleaned up, and his lip is swelling and doesn't need stitches per se, but it's just kind of one of those deals that was just a bit of a mess. And so that was one thing, to deal with all of that and feel awful about that whole process of having done that to this young boy. And so then to realize that I need to face his parents in a couple of days and, own up to what it is that's happened in our cabin. And they were extremely gracious. And I can say that they blew my expectations away. I was pretty nervous about exactly how they were going to respond, but they were generous and welcoming, and they were very kind in the way that they addressed the whole situation. They weren't up in arms and frustrated, and never really came back around with any nastiness. It could have been a part of that time, and really could have been kind of an unfortunate part of the whole picture. Now, sometimes people don't do what you expect, and they sometimes blow you away with how generous or welcoming they are, like in that situation. Or sometimes, you find that things don't go the way you expect, and you get a lot less than maybe what you thought was going to be a part of that picture. And so whether it's with another person or whether it's a moment that you expected and you're disappointed or your expectations are exceeded, you find that just life in general gets a little bit messier sometimes than what we thought. And especially when it comes to the way people interact with us. And it's hard for us to appreciate in the midst of that time how we receive love, how we understand love from people. And we're going to see that a little bit here in the account with Jesus today, because life isn't always neat and tidy, and sometimes there are some parts of that we might think, well, this just doesn't make sense, and it's not what I expect, and so therefore there isn't any love here. And we want to just affirm how Jesus continues to love us in the midst of some of the moments we don't expect. Mary and Joseph would be a great example of seeing some things that they didn't really expect. I mean, from the moment Mary saw an angel that told her she was going to become pregnant with Jesus, things started to unravel. All of a sudden, this questionable pregnancy brought Joseph into the picture, and he was wondering whether he was going to be in it for the long haul or not. But he did respond to the dream that God gave him to follow through, so they got married. Of course, you could imagine that every gossip monger in the area that they lived in were kind of scratching their heads saying, something just doesn't quite add up about this pregnancy, and when they got married and all of this other kind of stuff, I think something's going on that's just a little bit off here. Well, then they get this edict that they have to go to Joseph's ancestral home of Bethlehem, and so in order for them to understand how they were going to travel, Mary is getting quite pregnant, and they've got a donkey, and so here is a woman who is quite pregnant on a donkey for about 145 kilometers, all the way from where they lived in Nazareth down to Bethlehem. And then when they get there, she gives birth in this foreign town, this town that's like not her place, and her people are not around, and there's not the support system that should have been present in the midst of that time. It's in a stable, like a cave, and then these shepherds show up and say, well, angels told us about this, and so we just had to come and check it out. And then a few days later, they go to the temple to dedicate Jesus, and Simeon and Anna, these two people who have been pretty regular around the temple, they all of a sudden find themselves in this moment where they're expressing a lot of realities about the baby Jesus. And in there somewhere, the Magi show up, whether it's before or after. There's some question about exactly when that happened. But the Magi are a part of this, and then once they leave, everything starts to seem to unravel. We see in Matthew chapter 2, verses 13 through all the way into 23, that Joseph has this dream, and it's a dream to get your family out of Jerusalem. And so Jerusalem had classically been a place of refuge, and here in the midst of this time, it's kind of odd because Egypt had always been a place of slavery, and you went down there and it never really turned out all that good, but this time Egypt becomes the refuge. And so Jesus and Joseph and Mary escaped Egypt and lived there a few years until King Herod passes away. Then they returned to Nazareth, and it's probably true that all of the busybodies of Nazareth got their kind of conversation going again when they showed back up in town. And for most of Jesus' life, I'm sure that his birth was held in question as to whether or not it was something that had not quite lined up with Joseph and Mary's marriage. Well, other children were born, Jesus is growing up, and I'm sure Joseph and Mary had their moments where they're kind of looking at each other going, we're raising, the Son of God, Messiah here, like this is strange. I'd love to have the conversation with them, like what was it like to parent Jesus? But there are so many things that are part of their lives that didn't land the way that they expected. There were moments that were completely outside of their normal. And yet, I'm sure that as they look back and as they realize that God was directing and in his wisdom continuing to lead them, that there were parts of their lives that they would never trade. There were parts of their lives that they would look back on and say, that wasn't exactly the way I thought it was going to go, but I'm so glad God has been taking care and he's been in control. He showed his love throughout this whole time and his wisdom as he's leading us. Now, during the last few weeks of Advent, we've been talking about a number of different favorites that are Christmas carols or Christmas hymns. And in the song today that we're going to look at, O Come, Emmanuel, there is an artistry and a beauty, a musical artistry that is absolutely amazing. This song, you may know, is more than 1,200 years old. It was thought to have been written somewhere in the 8th or 9th century, and it had been sung for quite a long time, hundreds of years, in Latin. And when it was originally written in Latin, there was a composition in the way it was put together, and it's called antiphons. And so antiphons are a repetitive pattern that involve starting with O. So, O come, Emmanuel. And every verse started with a O as a part of that. Now, the other thing that's kind of cool literary style-wise in this song is that each verse begins with a letter that kind of adds up to an acrostic. And the acrostic is backwards. You start with the last letter and you end with the first letter. And so you have to wait till you get through all 7 verses till you get all the letters. And one of the words that are expressed through this all refer to Jesus. It's an acrostic about Jesus which says, Ero cras. Those are the letters, and that is a Latin phrase that actually refers to the statement, I will be present tomorrow. Now, it's not talking about I'm going to show up tomorrow. It's actually meaning, in a deeper way, I will be present in all your tomorrows. So, throughout O come, Emmanuel, there is a theme, I will be present in all your tomorrows. Now, at the same time as the song kind of talks about Jesus' first coming when he arrived as a baby, it also kind of allows us to sing about his return. And there are allusions throughout this about his return. And so when it's translated into English by John Mason Neale in the mid-1800s, some of this is lost, but a lot of it is retained as we look at these 7 verses, and it refers to different things about Jesus. Verse 1 refers to his wisdom. Verse 2 uses one of his names, Adonai. Verse 3 talks about his heritage as the root of Jesse and the key of David. In verse 4, it talks about him as the dayspring or radiant dawn. In verse 5, as the King of nations, including not just Israeli nation, but including Gentile nations. It's saying that God is the God and King of all the nations in verse 6. And then finally it ends with referring to the name Emmanuel. And when you put it all together in the Latin, you have Erocras. I will be present in all your tomorrows. Now, we love this hymn. It's a little bit more thoughtful, and now when I think about it and after I've done some research on it, I can hear a little bit more of the tone of a number of centuries ago. What's amazing, though, is that when we think about Jesus being with us, it reminds us in this song how we look to him and how we count on him. In the same way that Mary and Joseph recognized that he was with them even through some of the messy times that were a part of their lives. And like Mary and Joseph, we have messy times too where they don't necessarily connect with our expectations. And in the middle of that, we have a cool phrase and a cool verse here in O come, Emmanuel, that gives us something to think about as it relates to Jesus. Check this out. Verse 1 says, O come, O wisdom from on high, who ordered all things mightily, to teach us the path of knowledge, to us the path of knowledge show, and teach us in its ways to go. What a beautiful statement about who Jesus is, that he is wisdom and that he brings wisdom, and in his wisdom he helps guide us and he orders things in our lives in a way mightily to teach us and to share with us who he is. That's what he did with Joseph and with Mary. And that's part of the love of God. The presence of Jesus changes our expectation to understand that he is sharing with us more and more about his character. Now, the interesting thing as we start to explore what's going on here is that Jesus is coming to us. No other worship system in the world involves the God of that worship system reaching out to people. In all those worship systems, it involves the people trying to present themselves or orient themselves or meet up with a variety of different kinds of expectations to be able to satisfy the gods that they are worshiping. God himself shows up in our mess, reaches out to us, and into the mess of our lives, in the mess of Joseph and Mary's life, continues to shape in his wisdom and shows us his love by the way he guides us, helping us, maybe as we look back, to say, I'm not sure how we got to this point, but it is amazing. It blows all of my expectations away. If you think about Mary and Joseph for just a minute, you realize that if they had not engaged with Jesus' story, that they probably would have continued to live just ordinary, obscure lives in the nation of Israel. We'd have never heard of them, we'd know nothing about them, and we wouldn't have any kind of even closet admiration for individuals that were just kind of cruising through life in that particular time. But in his wisdom, he connects people to himself, to his story, to allow our stories to expand and to develop and to grow in a way that may seem messy at first, but ultimately are a part of the weaving of the way God is planning and working in our lives. In university, Val and I had been dating for a while at this point, and we had been, kind of touching on the subject of marriage from time to time, but it hadn't actually come to the place where there was a ring and an official ask and all of the different parts of the process. And so it was in between semesters at Christmas break, and I had an opportunity to work a convention during that period of time, and that was a planned thing. And so I was paid for that convention, which was a great blessing. And Val knew I was paid for that convention. And so when we saw each other in the new semester and we were talking about some of the things that we wanted to do, she said, well, could we use some of the money from what you got paid at your convention that you worked? And I kind of went, it's gone. Now, the reason why I was saying it was gone is because I had already used that money to put the down payment on a ring for us to be prepared to move in the direction of getting married. But I didn't tell her any of that. She had no idea that I had cashed all of that money in that direction. I'd worked with the manager of the jewelry store, and he gave me an arrangement. It was somebody that was a family friend that allowed us to put a down payment on, and then for me to pay as I was able, and when it was all paid, I could take the ring home. And so it was a wonderful arrangement. It was a willing opportunity to be able to engage in that way. And so she had no idea, and she seemed a little bit put off by the fact that all that money had just kind of disappeared. And later on, when she got the whole story, she realized, she said, I think I was a little bit hard on you in that, wasn't I? I said, well, I probably didn't give you the most direct answer. I didn't really know what to say, but yeah, it was a little challenging for us to kind of work through. And I think for a while, you even thought that I was being irresponsible with money because you saw that what I was paid for that just kind of seemingly disappeared. Well, it's interesting, as people walk with Jesus and as we follow him, there are moments that seem messy in our lives, and they don't always make a lot of sense to us. And I think Joseph and Mary's story kind of helps us to see that. The love of God, the wisdom of God, the presence of God is with us, but sometimes we can kind of scratch our heads and say, I don't really see how I like this. And, if I were engineering this, I'd probably plan a very different way to go about this, God. This isn't the way that I would do it. And as we celebrate his birth, we've probably already thought about that. This isn't necessarily the way that most of us would have allowed the King of the universe to show up on planet Earth. But Jesus reminds us, even through the circumstances of his birth, that he's not afraid to get down in the mess with us, and he's not afraid to kind of change things up and defy our expectations a little bit in the process. But at the same time, we're reminded that he is taking care of us in a way that we may not even realize at the moment. So when the details don't seem to make sense to us in the moment, someday we may understand, and we may not understand until we see him face to face. But we can trust that he's in the mess with us. And as we look back at life, maybe the way Joseph and Mary did, we can say that it was more than we ever would have expected. So today, as we think about this fourth week of Advent, and as we're considering that the theme of this day is love, I would suggest to you that love changes our expectation. It changes our expectation of each other. It changes our expectation in our connection with God as we follow him, and as we allow Jesus to walk with us and follow him, then we realize that he sustains us through tough moments. He sustains us through the mess. He walks with us in the midst of our messes. And ultimately, as we move ahead in our walk with God, we're blessed with the presence of God. We understand that the wisdom of God continues to guide us. We see the love of God shaping us and shaping what is a message of God, of hope in the midst of all of the moments that he brings, as he loves us through those times. Now, there are probably some of you that are watching today that are in the midst of some of those difficult times. There are a number of things that magnify that in this season of the year. Christmas, takes some of the good things that are part of our lives and makes them bigger, and it takes some of the bad things that are a part of our lives and makes them bigger too. And for some of you, this may be a first Christmas without someone that has been classically present in your life. It may be that COVID has changed your routines in such a way that it's brought some loneliness that was unexpected. There may be some brutal moments that are a part of your family or work or relationships. There may even be concerns about the future and challenges, maybe even in the present. And so today, let me remind you on this fourth Sunday of Advent that the love of God, the wisdom of God, and the reality of the presence of God, Emmanuel, God with us. He challenges our expectations, but he loves us in the midst of the mess. And he exceeds our expected destinations in life. As we see with Mary and Joseph, we see that as he includes us in his story and we walk with him, that our story takes on a new picture. Maybe one that was completely unexpected, because his love can change our expectations today. Let's pray together. God, we thank you that you are present with us, and you're not afraid of the messes of life. You're not afraid to get into some of the more challenging moments of our lives. There's nothing that escapes your wisdom, and you are continually teaching us and shaping us, and we thank you for that. And God, there are moments where we have to admit that we would probably engineer them differently, and I'm sure Mary and Joseph thought of that a number of times. I wouldn't have done it that way, and I'm not sure just exactly what they thought, but there are some moments that I know most of us here today have thought about, that we've wondered what you've been up to. And we're thankful for the fact that we can trust you, that we can trust your wisdom, we can trust your presence, we can trust your love today. And so we look to you in the midst of some of the messes that are part of our lives, messes of loneliness, or messes that are maybe even kind of some of the challenges or crises that have risen in our lives. We're so thankful for the fact that you are present. We're thankful for the fact that you love us. We're thankful for the fact that you are continuing to show your wisdom and your grace, and that you are walking well in the midst of this time. We may not understand all of what's happening on this side of heaven, but we look forward to connecting with you when we see you face to face, and having the privilege of being able to look back and see how you shaped us in the midst of times like this. We're grateful to you for your goodness to us and your love for us. In your name I pray. Amen. In the podcast extras today, you're going to find some scripture readings if you're doing an Advent wreath lighting at home, and I would encourage you to check those out. They're found in the description section of YouTube, as well as the description section of Facebook. There's a link that is available in both of those locations. That link will pop you over to our Kingston Standard Church website, and on that there are all of the different verses that are there, as well as some links for worship as a part of this day. An edition of O Come, Emmanuel is present there as well for you, some conversational questions that you may want to explore too, and some links for us as a congregation together. I want to encourage you that as this week unfolds, that you'll take just a minute and check out what's happening with Christmas Eve here at Kingston Standard Church. Our KSC Online will be our venue for Christmas Eve this year, and in the midst of this very unique year, it is very strange for us to not have a live edition service, an in-person moment, but this online edition service will be available starting at noon on Christmas Eve, December the 24th, and we look forward to participating with you, with our worship band, with a number of the elements that are a part of our live service in that setting as well. Thanks for taking the time to connect with us here today, and it's my pleasure to be able to visit with you in this way on a weekly basis. We're so grateful for your support and encouragement. We're continuing to pray for you, and I trust that you're praying for us too. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute to like or comment or share this video, that would be helpful as well. We'll see you again soon.